109, 112, and 100 air suspension. Is it reliable? I've been discussing 6.3s a lot recently with a few of our subscribers. It always seems like there are a few people looking at 6.3s that have contacted me, and so it's always kind of interesting when you meet someone who's looking at one of these cars. But I think the question that comes up over and over again to somebody who's new to the W109, which is the 300 SEL, 300 SEL 2.8, 3.5, 4.5, and 6.3, the W112, which is the 300 SE sedan, the 300 SE long wheelbase sedan, the 300 SEB, actually no, sorry, the 300 SEL W109, which we mentioned, the 300 SE coupe, and finally the 300 SE cabriolet, and of course the 600 is, does the air suspension work reliably? Now, Mercedes air suspension is not a cheap system to sort out. Valves are between $550 and $700 each. There are 4 of them, plus you have an antifreeze device that can also develop issues, plus an air compressor that can wear out and leak oil because it's a mechanical part. And of course you have those 3 little lines, if you're familiar with these cars, that join the air suspension network to the front subframe. And you have 4 airbags that are around $350 each. Now, why this system? Well, Mercedes believed that with a bigger car, an active air suspension system was absolutely necessary. And because with bigger cars, you sometimes end up with more mass, more bulk, then you have to make a determination about what system is best to handle the weight of that car. And Mercedes figured that an active air suspension system would be the best option. Now, the system that Mercedes used was absconded from Borgward on their P100 sedan. The P100 was a 2.2 or 2.3 liter engine, upper mid-size car. It was in the same dimensional class as the Mercedes W111, but it was carbureted, that Borgward developed, and Bosch developed an air suspension system for this car. Now, this car used the early single-stage air valves that were also featured on early 300 SEs, early 300 SE longs, and early 300 SE coupes and cabriolets. These valves are more money to rebuild. They're about $1,200 each to rebuild, and they don't have a height adjustment. They're either neutral position or regular driving position. And so, believe it or not, the dual position valves are much easier to rebuild based on what I've learned over the years, not rebuilding them myself, but what I've learned from talking to rebuilders, and they're usually also in better condition because most W112s were left out to pasture. The dual height control system was developed for the 600, and about 1965 it was integrated into the rest of the passenger car line. Now, Mercedes air suspension, I think the big question about it is it just going to fail and leave you on the side of the road? And the short answer to this is no. It's probably not going to do that. Even when the valves are leaking miserably, and even when a bag seems to have a tear in it, the system still seems to inflate reasonably well. The only time that you might have a real problem is if your compressor fails, which is rare for a compressor to fail. These compressors can develop leaks, oil leaks. They have a little connecting rod that I've seen fail at times. They have a tendency to not produce enough pressure, and of course they have there's the question of like how well serviced has the car been. Now, there's an oil line going to the air suspension pump. If you own one of these cars, you really need to make sure that it's not broken or about to break or seeping. The ends are removable, so you can actually rebuild the hose without the need of a crimping tool. Now, after you get the system rebuilt, if you go to somebody like Martin Verminghausen and you get all your valves rebuilt, Not necessarily the pump, but at least all the valves. And if your bags are showing deep cracks and they're over 15 years old, and you replace them, then you're going to have a system that works extremely well. You still might get an air suspension line at times, meaning that the pressure in the air suspension tank is low, but it doesn't mean that the system pressure is low, because each valve at the chassis acts as its own check valve. So when you shut the car off, the amount of air that is in that suspension system is going to drop down to a particular level. I can't remember, it's like five bars, maybe a little less than that. It's going to stay there. If it's leaking down, then your main valve acts as your next check valve. If your main valve is leaking down, your air suspension line has a check valve in it, and basically the tank serves as a check valve. And so that's if you have internal leaks. If you have external leaks from your valves or your bag chambers, then you're going to lose air a lot faster, and it's going to be a lot uglier. And that's what a lot of people don't know. Now, with Mercedes air suspension, here's some other things you need to know. First of all, if the car stays up for like 2 or 3 days, the system is leaking. There's something wrong. The system should hold air pressure ad infinitum. For those of you that are not sophisticated enough to know what the phrase ad infinitum means, it means it should never lose pressure. Period. Maybe after like a year, it might lose some pressure, but it should not lose. It should go down to a certain height, which is a drivable, usable height, and stay there and not drop any more after that. Number 2, should you use alcohol some of the time or all the time? According to Martin Worminghausen, all the time. Keep your alcohol bottle full and drain your tank at least every month so it doesn't rust out. There's a little push valve in it that you can use to drain. And then third of all, if you don't have any external leaks, you could still have an internal leak, and you could still be losing air that way. So just because you don't see soap bubbles in the valves doesn't mean that they're working right. Anyway, if you have more questions about Mercedes air suspension, please email me. I think most of you know where to find me by now. And if you have a problem with your air suspension system, then feel free to consult me, and I will try to walk you through it. I also recommend looking at Martin Worminghausen's website, 600airsuspension.com. That is 600, not, it's numeric, it's not spelled out. So, just so you know. Anyway, please like, share, subscribe, tap the bell for notifications, give us a thumbs up, leave a comment below, and if you're supporting us on Patreon, from the goodness of my heart, Thomas and I thank you. And I'm trying to figure out what my next Mercedes Classics video is going to be. Initially, I was going to do the 500e, but the owner of the 500e had to pick the car up and take it back home, and the timeline didn't quite work out because, COVID. And I need to figure out my next car that I'm going to do, which is probably going to be something like a 190 SL or I don't know, a 220D when I'm done with that. Anyway, thanks for watching, and if you have air suspension, keep it. Don't put springs in. Don't be a cheap ass. If you're driving a 109 and you really like the car, then you can afford the right parts and the right procedures to fix it. Bye.